You don't charge people anything. You give away the instrument. You're doing these concerts for the students. All of that costs money.
It's not the easiest thing to sort of run, this kind of fledgling nonprofit, mostly on my own. It's not the highest paying job. There are a lot of ups and downs, but that impact is really the thing that keeps me going. It just hit me like in the face super hard. And I said,
You had compassion on these kids.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
really, I saw myself. I saw
Yeah.
myself in them.
Was there, like I said, any wild stories where, something happened that you weren't expecting?
The valedictorian of the class was actually one of our musicians, which was kind of a little sense of pride. Really, really cool kid.
Think back on that. You're like, this is why I'm doing this. This is like, those are real results, that really matter. Jonathan Jacobs, nice to meet you. Thanks for being on the show here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, David. I really appreciate you having me. Looking forward to talking.
So, you are the founder and executive director of Rawkstars Inc. since 2003. You offer free music lessons, free instruments, and performance opportunities, all for free. So, your philosophy is you treat music as a basic human right. You've got over 12,000 hours of free lessons that you've given. You've served over 400 kids. You've raised nearly $1 million. You were featured on the Kelly Clarkson show. Kelly personally matched a $5,000 gift, which gave you 10 grand for being on the show. You've built partnerships with Guitar Center, Boys and Girls Clubs, youth facilities, and you run programs even inside the Rhode Island Training School, which is a juvenile facility. Your background is touring live as a sound engineer, 20 years in tech. You've done philanthropy at Hillsborough as a nonprofit leader. You use music therapists, so licensed music therapists, and SEL programming for youth development. So this is really, I'm so glad to have you on here because your your approach to this industry is so unique. I don't know if I don't think I've ever talked with somebody in the industry that not only does this as a nonprofit, and offering free lessons, but has had such an impact. And I mean, you're obviously really good at networking and connecting with people. So what gave you the idea to go like, I'm not going to charge for lessons. I'm just going to do this for free.
Yeah, wow. Thanks. It's kind of a little humbling hearing all that. I don't usually think of myself in such glowing terms, so I appreciate the preamble there. But yeah, to answer your question, really, Rockstars has always been kind of a mirror of my own life story. So it wasn't something I, did a strategic plan around. I didn't, spend tons of time, crafting the business model at the beginning. It was really just based on a program that I feel would have helped me as a kid and something that would have made a big impact in my own life. I've always been a bit of a black sheep, a bit of an outsider, as many kids are. I grew up in the '70s, with a broken home, bit of a rough upbringing, not a lot of role models, not a lot of positivity in my life, and music was really the one constant for me. It was the one thing that I always could rely on. It was always there for me. It always made me feel better, and it really gave me my identity, my first kind of pass at being, a unique individual person as a teen, growing up. Music became who I was and how I saw myself. And so, fast forward many, many, many years later in life, I got into lots of other, areas of career and, developing as a person, but music was kind of always there for me. And so when I got the original idea to begin Rockstars as a formal program, the idea of making it accessible to everybody was really front and center. being a music educator and having this background yourself, you know that there's an old saying, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And I really found that to be super true. And I never thought that, music should be seen as a luxury item that only, affluent people could afford. We've grown up in an era of data and information. And I think the benefits of music education are very well documented. We probably don't need to go into them and talk about it. I think it's well accepted that
Right. Yeah.
music really benefits everybody, but in particular young people, in a myriad of ways. And that shouldn't be something that, is only accessible to people that can afford it. And
Right.
like everything else in life, especially nowadays, everything's expensive. And, we see it, as you said, in the open. Music really is a basic human right, like clean drinking water, basic health care, education, and things like that. And so from the beginning, we wanted to ensure that all of our programming was free to the kids and families that need it the most.
So how did so you said you grew up in a broken home and you didn't have some of these opportunities. So how did you get introduced to music?
I was always really interested in music. So, I'll start first and foremost by saying I was just a super fan of music. I would say my earliest memories are, in the backseat of the car with AM radio, 70s AM radio, when my parents driving, those great melodies and those great musicians that we all heard, and then of course my parents loved Elvis. So that was kind of my first
Nice.
love. But then, later I started to get, as I said, my own identity through music. I think there's always a point when you separate from your parents, what they listen to,
Yeah.
and you kind of absorb passively, and then you kind of find your own music, and that becomes this split in your life where you start to become like your own person. And so of course, that happened for me with rock bands like, Kiss and Led Zeppelin and those kinds of I'll just say hard rock bands of the 70s. And so I
So
always
rock was kind of your that was your bent. Like you heard those guys and you're like, yeah, that's my sound. I like that.
I think so. I mean, anybody who was, a 7 or 8 year old boy growing up and looked at the cover and saw Gene Simmons with, in full makeup with blood dripping and breathing fire. I mean, it was basically like reading a comic book, and he was a superhero. So, and then, oh, by the way, they made these great, super catchy riffs. So yeah, that was kind of my first hook. But I always really gravitated to music. It became, my identity. I started to grow my hair. I got, the leather jacket, the whole 9 yards. And of course, I really wanted to play music, not just be a fan. And so in my early teens, I knocked around in a few garage bands and, tried playing guitar, tried being a singer. And two things really quickly happened. First of all, I realized I wasn't born with God-given talent for music. And at the time, I wasn't really necessarily a very hard worker, which, is kind of important if you're not really talented. So I pretty quickly realized that most of my friends were pretty far ahead of me as far as, playing music or becoming proficient was concerned. But through participating and just being in and around music and going to see concerts and, kicking around with a few of these bands, I wound up going into a recording studio. And that was really a transformational moment for me because it showed me somebody that was making a living through music and had a lot of the traits that I had, but wasn't necessarily a famous musician, So we went into the studio. We were doing just a little garage, demo with some friends. And I met the guy who owned the studio, who was also the sound engineer, which is a pretty common
Yeah.
combination. And this gentleman, he was very in charge. He was very confident. He had this beautiful building. This was back in the 80s when a recording studio was kind of like a religious, it was like
Yeah.
walking into a cathedral, right? Like
Yeah, that's
these
right.
beautifully
Sacred
designed,
ground.
yeah, like these
Yeah.
beautifully designed architecture, perfect rooms, all this wood and all these beautiful old vintage, preamps and compressors and a huge recording console. glass, huge speakers, like all that. It was a very much a religious experience. And for the first time, I realized that it may be possible for me to pursue music as a career without necessarily being an accomplished, player or guitar player or singer. And in that moment, I saw, this opportunity that before that had never really occurred to me.
Was it so it was because you saw that there was this whole opportunity for having, like, a recording studio, being an engineer, there's this whole back end, right? Like, the tech side or the producing side. So the
Exactly.
recording element for you became instantly, compelling.
Yeah, I mean, compelling to say the least. It literally, the day that that happened, I can still kind of feel that in my body just telling you the story. It turned my life around 180 degrees. I mean, I went from being kind of, um, I'll just say lazy, not hanging around with, people who are career oriented, no interest in going to college, didn't want to work, those things weren't important to me. And as soon as I realized that that was a possible career option for me, it was like a magnet. It was like a moth to a flame. I became obsessed with figuring out how I could make that happen. And again, we're talking about quite a few years ago, and it was a very different experience. Today, all you need to do is buy a computer, GarageBand, get a free DAW online, watch a couple of YouTube videos, and you can kind of get up and running with recording, which is great. And I'm really happy that the barrier to entry is has gotten so low for people to get into it. But back in the mid to late '80s, there was none of that. And so it was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of asking around. It was becoming friendly with the gentleman I'm describing who owned the studio, getting some advice from him, and really having to throw myself into it to figure out just how to even get started. But yeah, there was something about that kind of, I think you used the word back office, or, the production side of music and the technology, even in its, sort of like nascent state, that just really appealed to me. And it made me feel like I could do that. Whereas, talking about like some of the musical heroes I mentioned, that seemed pretty far away for a regular, kid like me, that wasn't that talented, that wasn't handsome. I wasn't sort of like cut from the traditional cloth of the idols that I kind of grew up looking at.
Yeah.
But when I saw the idea of having a studio or being an engineer and producing, it had a lot of the traits that I already sort of possessed, which, were like organization, analytical thinking, the ability to sort of like get groups of people on the same page and, get them motivated. Like the things that this gentleman did as I watched him in the studio were things that I already felt like I was good at. So it really became accessible to me in a way that playing music didn't really have.
Did you, at that point, become more motivated to, like you say, educate yourself, go through the schooling, do what needed to be done in order to become a producer? Is that what you mean? You started kind of going down that road?
Yeah, 100%. There used to be, it may still exist, I don't even know, but there used to be a big industry magazine called Mix, and that was sort of, the Bible for the recording industry. And of course, at the studio on the coffee table, he had a bunch of issues of, Mix magazine. So I, of course, grabbed one. I got myself a subscription, not even really knowing what the heck it was, and just kind of started devouring, anything and everything I could find about how studios worked, the names of engineers and producers, which, back in the day, we would see those names on the sleeve or the back cover of the records that we had. But it was really, it was a very, it was kind of a black box. You just see something, produced by, Glenn Johns or, George Martin, who did the Beatles. Like you knew the names and you knew that they had this title of producer or engineer, but I really didn't have any clue as to what that meant. So it started me on this real learning journey to sort of really immerse myself in, everything I could learn about it. And then shortly thereafter, literally in the back of Mix magazine was a little tiny, there was like a little section in the back of the magazine with people selling things and ads and help wanted and all the stuff that kind of used to be a thing when we were kids. And there was literally a little black and white print ad, must have been, 3 or 4 inches wide. It was in black and white. I can still even picture it. And it literally said, learn the art of recording. And it was for
Hmm.
this little tiny school out in the middle of nowhere in Ohio near a paper factory, where I wound up, sort of gathering up the money and scraping together a bus ticket, taking a 2 day journey from Boston to the middle of Ohio on a bus, which was educational unto itself, and then spending a couple months at the school, basically preparing myself to come back and try to become this thing called a sound engineer.
Yeah, that's a great headline. Learn the art of was it learn the art of music recording or sound engineering or
It just said learn the art of recording. I'm sure if I
of
Google it
recording?
now, I could probably even find that ad.
Learn the art of recording. Yeah, that's a great headline.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you just went, I think it's so interesting. I think about this with my kids because like my youngest son specifically, he's never been academically motivated.
Hmm.
He's how old is he now? He's turning 15 next week. But as soon as we started playing these board games where, it's like those games where you got to read a card,
Yep.
and then as soon as we started playing like board games when he's a little bit younger, and he couldn't read the card very well, and he's like, friends are around, we're playing, all of a sudden it became something important to him
Hmm.
to be able to read better, to present himself better, and all that, and so the motivation changed.
Yep.
And I find this to be the case. It's so interesting how like sometimes we put labels on ourselves or even our students, like as teachers, we'll just, oh well, that student isn't very musical, or they're just not very good at, this instrument.
Right.
And then as soon as you put something in front of them that motivates them,
Hmm.
it's like, oh, like all of a sudden they are good at it,
Yep.
right? Because they have a reason now. And it's so interesting how, like, I mean, just even that story that you told, like, you love music, but you just found like that you didn't have a knack for it or whatever. But all of a sudden you found an angle and that you had a reason to, to learn about this sound recording. You went for it and you went to this school and you got training. Um,
Yeah.
I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as someone who considers myself a lifelong learner, like your son, I wasn't necessarily academically focused as a young person, It just kind of wasn't my thing, and it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent or, bright or didn't give a shit. It was really just because I think most of what was put in front of me were things that just didn't resonate with me and things that I wasn't
Right.
that interested in. And I think that that's an area where music, really has the opportunity to make kids blossom, because there's always a kind of music or a style or an artist or a sound or a band or an instrument that will resonate with everybody. And mine is probably different from yours, which is probably different from your son's, which is different
Right.
for, you know,
Yeah,
everybody.
we're all different.
We're all
Yeah.
different, right? And so that's, the music is kind of known as, the universal language. And I think that it's, more universal in just in terms of how, that it can bring people together and how they communicate, but it speaks to everybody in their own unique way, right? Like, you read articles or listen to artists talk all the time about a particular song that they wrote or a particular lyric, and what they meant or what they were saying could be completely different from my interpretation of it, but it doesn't matter, right? Like, that's one of the beauties of it, is that it speaks to you how it speaks to you, right? And you said, like, your son may, or you use the example of like, oh, as a teacher, maybe this kid isn't very musical, or this kid's better than that kid. At the end of the day, with music, what does all that even really mean, right? Like, what is good? What is better, right? Like, there can be, it's a continuum, and everybody's interpretation of good and better is completely different. So it really opens the door to everybody to be part of it, to participate in it, and to find themselves in music.
Yeah, and I think it's a journey too. It's not a destination, right? Like you study music, but you don't really ever stop studying it. You become a student, and that's the journey. That's actually another way of saying it is the journey is the destination,
Mm.
right? Like the learning is the destination, and so that kind of speaks to your, your point of like some kids are better at one instrument than maybe another instrument. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that they're on a journey and that they're learning more about themselves and how to express themselves and how to express emotion, all of that. That really is the beauty of music is it drives deep into our soul and it affects us in a unique way that really I don't really think anything else quite touch us the same way that music can. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned like the idea of journey versus destination. I mean, music is not about the destination. Like otherwise, all of us would just fast forward to the last 8 bars of every song, right? We're not trying to get to the end of the song, right?
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to absorb the song, and the ending is made great because of the parts that came before it, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so you started down this path of being a sound engineer. Like, how did that go? Did you become a professional engineer? Did you open up your own shop? What happened?
I did. I did become a working sound engineer. At the beginning, when I started the process, again, going into the studio was kind of the gateway for me. And so I had this vision of, that I would maybe try to open a studio and become that kind of an engineer. But what happened was when I got back home to Boston from the school, you know, I had already previously been kind of immersed in the music scene here locally, which at the time was pretty thriving. There were clubs everywhere, there were local bands everywhere, rehearsal spaces, all that stuff. And I was, part of that community before I had ever, had the idea of trying to make a profession out of it. So once I got back to town, I had a lot of opportunities kind of presented to me because we were all young, nobody had any money, we were very much like garage band mode, and so nobody had their own sound guy, nobody had anybody working with them. So I kind of pretty quickly started getting lots of offers to mix people at live shows. And that was a completely different animal than recording in the studio. And so very quickly I got all these opportunities, and I said, okay, well, I had this picture in my head that I was going to be a studio guy, but I'm getting all these requests and opportunities to mix bands live, so let me give that a whirl. I think that really set the tone for me for lots of things in my life, including now as like an entrepreneur. Because I think a big part of running a business, whether it's music or otherwise, is being able to sort of evolve, right? And not just being so strong-willed that you say my business is going to be X at the expense of everything else, right? It's like, well, no, that was a good idea, and maybe it still could be X, but if these other opportunities are coming your way, you want to be able to look at them analytically and maybe take a chance and let yourself try those other things, because you really never know which of these things is going to pan out for you in life. So I think that was a really good early lesson for me to sort of be open to the idea of using this skill and this passion in a different way than what I had originally intended. And then the other real big lesson I think that came my way was doing live sound is super hard. I think it's hard to mix and record in the studio, and it requires, a very delicate and intense set of skills. But mixing bands live, there's no rewind button, right? There's no, hey, let's try that again. There's no, hey, let me work on this kick drum sound for the next 3 hours. Like you're kind of thrown
Yeah.
into this very complicated, high energy, public facing situation with a lot of noise, a lot of low quality gear in many cases, and you're just kind
Hmm.
of forced to make it work in real time. And it's super, super scary, and it's super, super hard. I think there are very few people who are like exceptionally good at it. And, I think that that was another big takeaway for me that, helped me in all kinds of areas of my life, was sort of being okay with getting into this complicated, difficult, scary situation and, making the most of it and even trying to enjoy it and embrace it for what it was. That took me
Yeah,
that
well,
took me a little while, but I think I kind of eventually got there.
yeah, and you have to think on your feet,
Oh
right?
god.
Like it's yeah, I mean a live performance. I've heard that with recording live spaces, it's all about mic position, like getting the right mic position, not just miking the band or but also miking the room.
Sure.
Like, is
100%.
is that a thing? Like, where, like, how do you approach that? If you have a live performance that you're gonna mic, do you think about like the size of the room, where you're gonna place the mics to mic the room, and then also, I mean, obviously you have to mic the
Yeah,
all that, but
of course. I mean that, with any space, whether you're in a studio or in a live, situation, nothing happens in complete isolation, right? Like everything is colored by its environment. So I think that, that's a scenario that's super common. The one thing I would say is I think the most important factor in any kind of situation when it comes to recording or sound, whether it be in a studio or in a live situation, is the quality of the band and their preparedness. you know, as an engineer, it's called sound reinforcement, right? And the reinforcement is you're taking the source material and you're, doing things to try to enhance it, right? But if you don't have great source material, the reinforcement can be quite tricky.
yeah, like, what are you reinforcing?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't wanna reinforce bad material.
Yeah,
You're just
so
making it worse.
and it's more about, it has a lot to do with the confidence of the players,
Yeah,
their experience level, their chemistry, together. We've all heard stories, right? Like famous musicians that are known like for their equipment, right? Like Eddie Van Halen was known, he built all his guitars, he always tinkered with his amps, he was very hands-on and creative. And you see that a lot of young musicians will, think that buying an expensive guitar or a certain piece of gear or getting a certain mic for the studio is going to, take your game to the next level, so to speak. But really, most of it is in the hands of the players, right? Like Eddie Van Halen could have picked up the cheapest, junkiest guitar in any situation, and he would have sounded like Eddie Van Halen. You know what I mean?
right, right.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that in music in general, whether it's whether it's recording. Of course, the gear is important. Of course, the knowledge is important. But at the core of all of it, is the performance of the artist. And part of the job of an engineer, even in a live situation, can be, helping the artist have that kind of confidence that the sound is going to be good, that helps them to perform better. You know what I mean? So I think that that's also part of it. It's highly mental. There's a lot of chemistry even between, the artists and the crew that's sort of helping them put the show together, of
Yeah.
which, a sound engineer is clearly one of those members.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I was just curious because I've done some live recording.
Mhm.
I have a choir that that's my jam. Like, I don't have rock bands. Like, for me growing up, it was all classical.
Mhm.
So I'm that guy. But no, so like, and we've done like choir recordings.
Mhm.
And so you like go to a venue and it's like, how do you mic that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, where do you put and obviously it depends on the room, all that, but I just find that interesting. That whole idea. And I know people have different like preferences about how they want something to sound with that too, like, more reverb, less reverb, all that kind of thing. But
100%.
um over your years of being a sound engineer, do you have to kind of balance that? Like, at the end of the day, the person that's paying for the recording, are they like sitting next to you for like the final draft and saying, okay, I want it to sound more like this or like that?
I think so. all artists are different, of course, as are all engineers. But I've always been a very collaborative person. I think that's another strong
Seems like
lesson.
you have to be, right?
Yeah, I think that's another strong lesson I took away from music is, like one of the most important things for being a great musician is being a great listener. Not only just learning the parts or developing your chops, but if you're not listening to the other people around you, and if you're not paying attention to what they're doing, and the whole thing has to kind of fit together to make the sum of the parts, better. I think that I sort of like learned that early on, and I've always just been the type of person that would prefer to work on something together with other people, whether it was music, or mixing, but even, carrying forward today, like into business and other projects and things that I do. I always find that I just have more fun when I'm doing it with somebody else. Of course, there are some times or certain tasks where it's, I got to be heads down, or I'm in front of the computer or writing, or certain things that are more of a solo task. But I generally thrive as a person in a more collaborative environment where I'm contributing and working with somebody that has ideas that are different from mine, that I can find common ground and mutual respect for the sake of coming out with a better project at the end of the day.
So let's talk about Rockstars.
Sure.
When did you start it? Well, actually, you started in 2003, but like
Yep.
at as kind of what point during this whole education process for you did it start? What was the environment like in your life,
Yeah.
getting
So
into it?
yeah, sure. So I had spent about a dozen years traveling as a front of house sound engineer and tour manager. Visited a lot of countries, maybe 20, 25 countries.
Wow.
Lots of great experiences, lots of fun as a young person. And I started to get to the point where I was getting a little older. I was in my 30s. I wanted to settle down. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to get married. All those things. And like anything, even something you love, like music, there came a point when it started to feel a little bit more like a job than, just an expression or a
Sure.
passion. And so I started to notice that computers were really getting popular around this time. I sound like super old saying that. um, I just realized it as it was coming out of my mouth, but it's true.
That's all good.
Yeah, we were like turning the page as a society from analog to everything digital, and it
Yeah.
happened super fast. And so I kind of saw that happening, and I had this thought that hey, I'm kind of this technical person. I can run this a recording console. I can mix. I understand signal flow, a little bit of electronics and acoustics and things like that. I could probably learn how to use a computer. And so I started down that path a little bit, and I decided that I wanted to pivot my career away from music into becoming a computer guy, specifically a web developer. This was in the early days of the web was really,
Smart.
growing and
Yeah.
exploding is a better word. So I threw myself into that world, and I started to pursue career opportunities. I landed a job with a really great company working with some really large Fortune 500 clients, which completely, it was a whole new world for me. And it was another opportunity to really become a sponge and absorb and learn all these new skills, which I did. I always, really enjoyed that kind of an environment, and sort of being able to take in, a whole new direction. And I've made a lot of career pivots in my life that don't seem connected, but in hindsight, at least for me, they kind of make logical sense. So I went into the IT industry, started working for some big companies, but very soon after, I found this kind of hole in my chest where music used to be, right? And
Yeah.
I still loved music. I was still a huge music fan, et cetera, et cetera. But I wasn't spending my time in and around musicians as near as much. So I had a large crew of friends that mostly were musicians, kind of the same holds today, many years later. But we used to get together. We used to get together and do these fun summer softball games. which really was just an excuse to get together with your buddies, play music and drink some beers and just kind of like goof on each other. None of us were good at sports or athletic. So I wound up organizing this softball game, and it was filled with all my musician friends. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could, do this as an annual event instead of just, this random one-time get together, because it was so much fun. It was like the highlight of the summer for all of us.
Hmm.
And so I decided, I said, well, what if we do like a charity softball game, and let's collect money for, some local charity. And maybe that's a way that we can have the second annual, the third annual, the fourth annual, and make it and sort of grow this thing. And so that's what we did. We rounded up all these people. We did a charity softball game, and we collected, I don't know, $1,500 or something, and we donated it to a local charity called the Cam Neely House, which was helps families of cancer patients. Cam Neely was a famous hockey player on the Boston Bruins at the time, and I was always a
Hmm.
big hockey and Bruins fan, so that was just kind of like a random choice. But after we had that first game, it was probably one of the most joyful memories of my entire life.
Mm.
And I got so many people the next day called me and said, "Oh my God, like that was the most fun thing we ever did. Thank you for organizing it." I can't, well, we raised, $1,500, like, which for us was kind of a big sum at the time. And just, it became this thing that just brought love out of all these people. We were all kind of friends, and more than friends, like a brotherhood. And it was just really this way that expressed all that love, and music was kind of the common thread. So then I got to thinking, I said, you know what, maybe we should do the same thing, and maybe we can find a way to have people express love through music and make our own nonprofit out of it, instead of gathering this money and donating it elsewhere. What if I created something where the money would go to fund music for kids, just like all of us were impacted by music? Maybe we could do the same with other kids. And so that was really where it all started. And to be quite frank, like, we're 20, almost 22 years into it at this point, and that ethos is still very much a part of everything we do. We want to have all of our programs infused with a couple of things. Community is one. It may sound corny, but I think love is actually a very important factor in everything that we do. And the idea of bringing people together for a common cause is also something that's very important and continues to be one of the cornerstones of all the programming that we run today.
So you raised this money, you gave it away to a charity, and then that gave you the idea, hey, maybe we could raise money regularly
Yep.
to fund music lessons for kids. Like that's where it all started.
That's where it all started. Yeah.
How do you even start something like that, right? Like, I mean, you started a nonprofit and then you find a building and like walk me through that. How does that work?
Yeah. So again, a lot of these are like patterns that have emerged in my life. Just like, I went on this mission to try to figure out how to get into sound engineering when I really knew nothing about it. I went on a similar mission to figure out, what is a nonprofit? How could I start a nonprofit? Like, what does that even mean? But I sort of threw myself into it. Fortunately, by this time, I was already working in a professional setting, and I was surrounded by lots of people with experience in business. And so I got some help and mentorship there from some key friends. But pretty soon, I had this plan, and we came up with a name, and the sort of traditional, like, let's make a logo, let's make a name, like,
Right.
what's our mission statement. And it just sort of started from there. But just like when I sort of went down the path into music as a career, it didn't really feel like hard work. It didn't feel as complicated as it sounds in hindsight, because it was something that I cared so much about. And I think
Yeah.
that's another recurring theme is, I think one way you can help kids through music is letting them find something that they already have a strong attraction to and something that they themselves love. And then you just kind of cut them loose, you know, you don't have to do that much hand holding. Once somebody connects with something that's really important to them, it might need a little bit of guidance at the beginning, just, you know, kind of push in the right direction. The rest of it kind of becomes easy and fun. And, you know, back to your metaphor about the journey, right? Like that's what we're all looking for is a way to pour ourselves into something that we really care about and make something of that idea. So, you know, it wasn't that difficult for me to sort of figure it out from there. And then once we got started, you know, we built, you know, slowly and steadily, like, you know, brick by brick, year over year. And the, you
Did
know,
you find a building right away, or did you just teach out of like
we
a room?
actually didn't, you know, we came up with this with another, I think is a pretty unique model about the way that Rockstars operates is we operate in a fully distributed model. And what that means is that we take advantage of the fact that all of these great music stores and, you know, youth development partnerships and facilities already exist in spades,
Mm,
right? So we didn't want to build or, you know, take over a space because a that comes with a lot of overhead, right?
cost, right?
A lot of cost, and B, it also very much limits the opportunity for kids to come to it unless they happen to live right in the local area. And, you know, going back to this idea of accessibility and making music and its benefits available where it's really needed, we said, hey, why are we going to reinvent the wheel if we run into a kid, you know, and he or she lives in Boston? There's already a bunch of great partners in Boston. Let's just figure out how to connect the dots with them and help the child get in, and then take care of the financial aspect of it. Or, you know, if a kid lives in Rhode Island, if a kid lives, you know, I know you
So
are.
just all over.
Yeah, we
Like,
focus.
so you didn't actually have a physical location. You're actually like it's just students wherever they are.
We
So do you
Yep.
send the teachers to them, or
We never had a physical location, and we still do not have a physical
you still
location
don't have a physical
21 and a
location?
half years later. Yeah, it's really the model is fully distributed. So I know I'm going to like name off towns or cities that you or your guests may not know because I'm just, you know, it's my local area.
That's all right.
Um, but you know, every state, right, has certain towns that are underserved, right, and need the support more than others, right? So we've got lots of those here in Massachusetts where I live. And so we want to go into those communities where these kids live and service them in a way that's convenient and easy for them, right? Typical music student for Rockstars comes from a single parent background, usually a mom, and, you know, asking mom to drive, you know, their son or daughter to guitar lessons on Tuesday night at 6 o'clock and go cross town or to another city is
Right.
another burden that they don't need, and that's not really going to be helpful to them. So what we do is we partner with music stores all over the state, and Rockstars operates in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So we do focus on those two states for now, but we'll take students from any city within those two states. And so we have the advantage of being able to find partners right in the neighborhoods where these kids live. So it's super convenient for them. It also has the added benefit of being more collaborative. Like I said, I like the collaborative nature of, you know, music making and projects. So now we've got partnerships with all these amazing, you know, music stores all over the two states. We're also helping to support those stores, right? They're all small community businesses with, you know, whatever their student enrollment is.
Right.
So we're helping them. We're paying music teachers directly, and so we look at it as a win-win-win for everybody. You know,
So
we
you
don't.
partner with these retailers,
Yep.
these local mom and pop shops that are
Yep.
selling music instruments or something like that, and then you get these kids lessons, and then you send the teachers to this location. The students meet them there, and that's where you conduct your lessons.
Yeah, we literally leverage the teachers that already work at these music stores. So the
Oh,
teachers
so they're already working
the
there.
te
Oh,
we
gotcha.
yeah, we wanna support them as well, right? Because 'Cause they're young music instructors, and it's important for them to have business and students and sort of grow their own careers. So we leverage existing resources in every way, shape, or form, right? I like to think of it as like sustainable farming. We're not all about like making this other thing and, sort of we want to use stuff that's already there, and we want to support the growth and regeneration and improvement of these existing systems. So that was kind of our model from the jump. And that program that I'm describing, that's just one of four programs that Rockstars now offers. But that was our starting point. We still have that program, and we've had several hundred students through that program in the
Hmm.
21 plus years that we've been in operation.
How many teachers do you have operating just around those areas?
We've probably partnered with, I would say, upwards of maybe 40 different music stores within Mass and Rhode Island during that time. And as you know, as a music educator yourself, sometimes kids will go through more than one teacher, depending on how
Right.
long they stay with it. It's another really important aspect for us is to match kids with a teacher that's going to really become a mentor for him or her. It's not enough to just sort of be proficient with music or know how to read music or know how to teach music. Most of the kids that we serve come from a background similar to my own. Maybe they don't have a dad at home. Maybe they're in need of a role model. Maybe they're having trouble at school. And so oftentimes the music teacher becomes a surrogate big brother or dad or mom, or sort of a mentor for the child. And we also really look for partnerships with music stores that provide a really safe, friendly, positive space for the kids to be, because that consistency and that regularity, that once a week when they go to, voice lessons on Thursday night, that might be the one, 45-minute window in their whole week that's not filled with chaos or stress or
Right. Yeah.
anxiety, right? So even the space and the vibe of the stores that we partner with is very important to us, and we seek to cultivate that relationship with them. And we're able to do a pretty good job of that because we don't see ourselves as competing with them. We're not trying to take students from them. We're
Right.
not trying to do their thing better. We're trying to, find ones that have a lot of the same, values that we do, and we try to support them and give them business and make them better through investing in that relationship.
So, mention that you use licensed music therapists. So, are those stores, are the teachers that are there, are you picking stores that employ licensed music therapists? Is that how you're deciding who to partner with?
In some cases, yes. In terms of the program that I just described, our original program, which we call Rock and Roll, ENROLL, like enroll. We like to do those kind of like double entendre kind of things. So for that particular program, we sometimes have licensed music therapists, but generally speaking, we just partner with traditional music instructors at these same locations. Where the music therapists come into play is in some of our other programming, where we are going out into community spaces and doing youth development work through music. And in those models, we do regularly employ LMTs as part of the programming, because they specifically have a background with some of the issues that the kids we're trying to work with may have.
Okay, so you license, so you actually employ those as separate instructors that like working for these music reading. You send them to, is that where is that like a special location where you're sending them? Like a
Yeah, so
okay,
maybe it's helpful if I just like back up briefly and explain the four programs we have. So I've already kind of explained Rock and Roll, which is our OG sort of
right.
ground zero program. Find a kid who wants to participate in music, give him or her a free instrument, find them a local qualified music store and instructor where they can take lessons in their own community, We coordinate, we pay for it, and away they go. That's kind of like our base program. Separately, we've started in the last several years to do three other programs. The second one we call Band Together, and that's a program where we go into community centers, typically like a boys and girls club or somewhere where there's like a large concentration of youth already there. And oftentimes, the challenge for those places is they want to spin up a music program, but they don't have anybody on staff who is necessarily qualified to teach it. They might not have a space set aside at the Boys and Girls Club that's, just for music. They certainly don't want to go buying equipment and doing all those things. So what we do is we offer a turnkey music program where we'll come in to that facility. We'll bring in teachers, often a music therapist or some combination of instructors, one of which may be a music therapist. We bring all the equipment, we design a curriculum, we tailor it for their budget. We, find a little space in the corner. Sometimes we have a dedicated room, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we leave equipment there, sometimes we have to bring it in and out every time. But essentially, we can offer a turnkey music solution for any facility that wants it, and we can tailor it to their needs and demographics and budget, and really every other aspect. So that's kind of our second program.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one also, like I said, does employ a lot of music therapists, because
Yeah.
we do a lot of group music classes in that setting. It's not really about one-on-one music lessons when you're in that type of environment. It's more about group learning and putting together, bands and performances and things like that. Our third signature program is called Beats, Bars, and Beyond. And you alluded to this a few minutes ago. We teach music inside youth correctional facilities in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It's got a lot of unique features about it. In terms of the instructors, it's really important to find teachers for that program that are culturally relevant to the youth that are in these facilities, that know the neighborhoods, that know the styles of music. It's very much based on hip hop. It's very much based on music production, recording, beat making, and also career readiness, because all the youth that we serve there, they're all teenagers. They're 95% boys. And they really gravitate to hip hop. They have a lot to say. They all keep notebooks and they've all experienced a lot of trauma in their lives. And music can be a very healing experience for those individuals. And so we go in with, very tailored instructors that are champions in all those sort of aspects that are important for this type of a program. And we work with them a couple of times a week. And really, the focus is around creating songs as a group. We want them to work together. We want them to find themes to write about and ways of expressing themselves that are positive. When you're in a facility like that, it's a very different experience for a young person. You can't decide what to wear. You can't decide when to eat or what to eat. All the surfaces are hard. There's no cushions. There's no soft. There's no color.
Mm.
And so music really gives them a lot of agency, which is something they have almost none of. So we see a lot of kids blossom for the couple hours a week that they're there in the music class, because we let them decide kind of what they want to do. We give them the power to sort of tailor the class to what they're interested in. And then our most recent program that we're actually just kind of starting now is called Hustle and Harmony. And what we're doing there is we're actually going into the public education space for the first time. We're partnered with a local charter school here in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is a city north of Boston. And we're going to be teaching kids how to take music or whatever art they're interested in and turn that passion into skills for the new creative economy, right?
Mm.
We live in a modern time where artists don't have necessarily a quote unquote traditional avenue towards making money and making a career by just releasing music, for example. So we've designed a curriculum that will teach them skills how they can turn that passion into an actual business, right? Like how to write a business plan, how to make a budget, how do you pay taxes, how do you copyright your material, how can you build a portfolio, how can you use social media to do marketing, right? All these other music adjacent skills that
Hmm.
don't really have a lot to do with necessarily performing or actually playing or even writing music, but are super important to take your love and your passion and turn it into a way to make a career and a life for yourself that's not just, a side hustle or a hobby. So sorry, that was like super long-winded, but I wanted to describe and give you like a
Yeah.
wider palette of the types of programming that we offer here through
Yeah,
Rockstars.
those are awesome.
Thank you.
And I like how creative realizing that, okay, we don't have a physical space. So how do we leverage other people's space through a collaboration with them so that we can work together and still provide free music, free education? And it's really more than music lessons. I mean, this sounds more like
Way more.
you're empowering kids to actually get into music, not just to play and have fun, but to actually potentially make a career out of it. And I love the and I want to kind of land on this for a second here.
Sure.
This Rhode Island training for incarcerated youth.
Yep.
Tell me, how in the world did you break into that? Like, is there a wild story that where you found yourself teaching these kids?
Yeah, we got an opportunity several years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, before COVID, where I was contacted by a woman who was a social worker at an adult prison, a state facility here in Massachusetts, and she had found our website and she was looking for, the guys inside all really asked for music and they were, hungry for some instruments. And so she was just doing some research. She stumbled on our website, she reached out, we started talking, and she asked if we would donate, some instruments. And I said, of course, like that's fine. But, it started me thinking about this whole idea of accessibility in music, right? Like, talk about having no access to music or anything else. Being incarcerated, is really like the ultimate expression of no access.
Yeah.
So that really piqued my interest. And, we, one thing led to another. I said, oh, can I come visit you like in person? Like, let's meet. I went and visited her at the jail. And as soon as I stepped inside, I mean, it was intimidating. It was a little scary. Um, but as soon as I got inside, I very quickly realized that the guys that I met that were incarcerated were just like everybody else. They found themselves in this horrific circumstance. Some of them may have done, some terrible things, but I had also done a lot of stupid, terrible, misguided things when I was a young person. And the idea that, somebody didn't throw me away and sort of, seal me off from the rest of the world and the opportunity to then turn myself around and find something that could be my unlock. It just hit me like in the face super hard. And I said,
You had compassion on these kids.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
really, I saw myself. I saw
Yeah.
myself in them.
Hmm.
And, I think I said at the outset, Rockstars has always really been a mirror of my own life and kind of the program that I wished that I had had as a kid, and something that I think if I had found it would have really helped me. I eventually got there in other ways, but it could have accelerated the process, and it certainly could have helped a lot of other people. And so, it lit kind of a fire in me to try to figure out a way to see if we could bring that opportunity and the benefits of participating in music inside the jail. And so it was, as you could imagine, like a pretty long process. There was a lot of back and forth. It's,
Right.
obviously security is a huge concern. We had to really pivot because we had pretty much up until then been focused on, quote unquote traditional music lessons, guitar, piano, drums, voice, like those are kind of the big ones, if
Right.
you have a music store. These guys wanted to learn hip hop. They wanted to make beats. They wanted to record. They all kept notebooks, right? They had these very detailed, poetry in some cases. And
Mhm.
so we said, okay, like the building blocks are there. We just need to change up our tool set. We need to change up, our teachers, right? We can't send in, you know, someone with the wrong skill set, because guys in jail, they see right through that, right? Like they want somebody who they can look at and say, okay, this person is authentic and this person
Mhm.
understands me, and maybe even somebody that they could see themselves becoming, you know? And so we sort of worked on that a lot. We found the right teachers. We reoriented our, programming to be more about songwriting and different genres, and through technology. And we just went in and started doing it. Right. We made a lot of mistakes. It wasn't great at first, but over time we got better. We honed it, and that was kind of the beginning of us getting this program off the ground floor. That first couple month pilot. At the end of the pilot, this is another thing I didn't mention this, but all the Rockstars programming is very geared around performing music and not just practicing or learning or rehearsing. At the end of each cohort or semester or whatever the breakdown is, depending on the program and the location, we always want to have the opportunity for kids to get on a stage and perform. As you know, making music or practicing music is a completely different skill set from performing music.
Right.
And I think it's a really important distinction. And it also just speaks to different people, the same way that we talked earlier about how music is very unique, right? Like for me, I was not an accomplished musician. I'm still not an accomplished musician. I can kind of play, I can sort of play, standard blues, and sort of like, I have kind of like a tunnel that I can stay in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But put me on a stage and I'm like in my glory, right? Like
Mm.
I gravitated. I was the type of person who was unafraid. I had a lot to say, as you can tell, and my personality really can come out by performing. And music has that impact on a lot of these kids, right?
Yeah.
Some of them might be talented by nature and they might be great at making music, and they might be petrified to get up on the stage, and vice versa. Kids are not petrified and they can't wait to get on stage, but they're not really a great player. Both of those skills are equally valuable. Imagine if your son or daughter develops the confidence that comes from performing music in front of people and getting over that hump of being scared, and seeing that not only did you survive, but maybe you had some fun and there was a little bit of a thrill there, and you kind of, almost get addicted to the feeling. Imagine how that young person is going to do when they sit across from somebody on their first job interview, right? Like they're going
Right.
to have the confidence, they're going to look that person in the eye, they're going to shake their hand, they're going to speak with authority and authenticity, and they're going to have a good chance to get that job, um, whether it has anything to do with music or not.
So once you got in, like into the facility, were actually like, were there some hard lessons that you learned? Were there some things that you did wrong? Was there, like I said, any wild stories where, something happened that you weren't expecting? What was it like actually being in there and teaching lessons to the incarcerated youth?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me, it happened a little bit later. We had a few of these pilots. We tried a couple of different facilities. We moved around. We tweaked, and then about a year and a half ago, we landed at the Rhode Island Training School, which you've referenced a couple times, which is the only facility in the state of Rhode Island. So every single kid who's justice impacted
Mm,
in Rhode Island winds up at this space. This past spring, I got invited to attend the high school graduation inside of the prison, because all the kids, they're all teenagers. They're from age 13 up to 19, but all the kids that are in the facility are required to pursue their high school diploma while they're in there. So they're actually attending school classes, and music and rock stars is an after school activity for them, because just like your son or daughter is attending school year round, 7 to 3 o'clock or whatever the hours are, they have the same kind of schedule. So a bunch of kids graduated. I got invited to the graduation, and it was kind of like like banquet style, right? Where you sit
Okay.
at a table with a bunch of, people at a wedding. Maybe you don't know them, but you got like, 8 or 10 people at a table. And that's it's a small gathering too. There's probably about 100 people there, and there was maybe, I think, 13 kids graduated in this particular class. So first of all, I think 7 of the 13 kids were kids that I knew through the music program. So as soon as I went in, I was like, wow, like a majority of these kids, I know, and I know them through music, and so that's like part of it. The valedictorian of the class was actually one of our musicians, which was kind of a little sense of pride. Really, really cool kid. But what really kind of struck me in the end that I'm getting to is I sat with my wife at a table with the family of one of the students who was graduating. And this is like we'd been doing this work for a couple of years. So I met, dozens, if not hundreds of kids in jail, teachers, guards, administrators, staff. Like I had all these friends in all these different prisons, all these people that work in reentry, but I had never really spent time closely with the mom of a young person who was in jail. And so I found myself at this table with this woman and, a sister and an uncle and a few others. But the mom was so grateful and so thankful and so happy to see her son graduate and to know, and he had obviously talked to her about the music program and how much he loved it and he wanted to become a musician when he gets out, and it had such a huge impact. And I think that a big part of working and doing music in prisons, a lot of people don't understand why it's important. And I've even had the question, like, why are you investing your money and resources in these people? Like, they did these horrible things, they don't deserve it, quote unquote. And I think if anybody could spend and have one meal with the mom of somebody, of an incarcerated youth, all that would go away. And
Mm,
everybody would realize that they love their child just as much as everyone else loves their child. They want their child to be safe. They want their child to have opportunities. They want their child to succeed and be successful in their life. And, there's no stronger person in the world than the parent of somebody who has their son or daughter in jail. And it was just such a powerful experience for me to connect with that mom, that it just sort of reinforced a lot of the things that I had in my mind as like theoretical or that I had read in books, but it sort of crystallized it in a real, lived experience kind of way that, would have been impossible to replicate otherwise.
it's amazing, man. What like that's the kind of stuff that just stays with you, and when you come up against those hard days or you get something doesn't go well in the organization, you think back on that and you're like, this is why I'm doing this. This is like those are real results, that really matter. So
Yeah.
no, I love that. That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
That's
thank
really,
you.
really cool.
And we've Rockstars has been super fortunate, and I feel blessed and honored literally every single day, because we've been lucky enough to have, dozens, if not hundreds of stories of impact on individual kids and families, like that. And, as you said, it's not the highest paying job. It's not the easiest thing to sort of run, this kind of fledgling nonprofit, mostly on my own. There are a lot of ups and downs, but that impact is really the thing that I kind of keeps me, keeps me going and gravitate. And it's the thing that makes it worth doing. It's like
Yeah.
I've always found it. I need to be doing something with my life that I care about, that is going to be good for the world, because anything that's good for the world is also good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the finances because again, I don't know a lot about running a nonprofit in general, but just a music organization. So, how does it work? Like, you don't charge people anything, you give away the instrument. You're doing these these concerts or these, these performance opportunities for the students, all of that costs money. I mean, assuming you're paying these instructors.
Yep.
So where does the money come from? And like, how does the money flow work?
Sure. So just like any solvent and mature business, you've got to have multiple streams of revenue, right? You can't be reliant on any one thing, and you've got to kind of tailor the business to those revenue streams. So we've done just that. So the starting point was just like any small nonprofit, right? Like local fundraisers, right? Like let's have a concert and sell tickets and raise money and stuff like that. So we started out, the first many years just kind of doing grassroots organic, one-on-one fundraising and hosting events, and that was kind of like got us through the beginning phase, enough to sort of get a little longevity and to sort of grow those events to where we could increase our capacity to bring in more students. So that was kind of the starting point. But then later, what we realized is, just what you're talking about. Like, if you're going to scale this up and you're going to be able to impact more and more kids, you need to find other sources. So the way that our partnership model works with the other programs I described, besides the lesson program, is we took our experience and our skill and our network and our resources in curriculum building and teachers and equipment and all our relationships, and we partner with the facilities so that they pay a program fee to bring us in to run music programs on their behalf. So that's a revenue generating source for us. The beauty of that model, again, we like to look for these opportunities to support and to sort of do these win-win partnerships. So the beauty of that model is, for example, we can design a budget for a boys and girls club. Let's just use a theoretical example. And these are, just kind of like random, easy math numbers for me. So don't hold me to these numbers, but say a boys and girls club wants to spin up a music program. They want to, they have 250 kids enrolled. They want to have twice a week. We want to have two instructors, a couple of different classes. We put together a budget. Say, for sake of argument, that budget is $50,000 for a year. So what
Okay.
Rockstars can do as a nonprofit is we can say, well, the budget is 50K, but part of the budget is equipment. So we can get some of that equipment donated through our other partnerships. So let's knock 5K off of that. So now it's 45. So beyond that, what if we charge you 25 or 30, and then we partner together to seek grants or sponsorships for the other 15, right? So we bring this whole communal community building model even to the funding of our programs. So we're able to offer a high quality turnkey well managed music program for a partner for a really low price. And then we're able to supplement that and make up the delta by doing grant writing, by finding sponsorships, and by finding creative ways to bring equipment into the program through our partnership with Guitar Center as one example. So that's kind of how our second sort of stream of funding works, is program fees through our partnerships in the community. The third way we've developed revenue stream is we actually started what we call our fan club, the Rockstars Fan Club. And what that is a subscription model for donations for individual
Huh.
donors. So,
Okay.
just like you have a Netflix account, you have,
Right.
Amazon Prime or whatever, right? You also have a Rockstar subscription. And what that does is that allows us to be inclusive and equitable for everybody. So if you're not very well off and you can only afford $5 a month, you pick your own amount, you pick $5. If you're doing, you have more resources, you can pick 20, you can pick 30, you can pick 100, kind of roll your own. But you enroll with your credit card, and we swipe your card once a month for whatever that subscription fee that you've self-selected into is. And so we have developed a few hundred people in that fan club now over time. And so that money we've typically earmarked towards our rock and roll program. So that lets us know it's predictable, it's more stable, and we can use that to sort of decide how many kids we're able to enroll in that particular program. And it also lets those people know who are subscribing that their funding is going directly to supporting that group of kids that are taking music lessons in their very own communities. So that's kind of our third revenue stream. And then our fourth revenue stream is, again, as we've matured, we've developed a lot of stories of impact, a lot of credibility. And so more recently, we've got into the grant writing space. And now we have a contractor on our staff who writes grants on our behalf every month, and that's become another significant revenue stream for Rockstars, going through the grant space. And then I'll say just lastly, organically over the years, we've been around now 22 years, and we've impacted many, many, many kids and families, but also many, many donors and volunteers. So people have now started to spin up their own fundraising events on our behalf, which is pretty amazing. Road races, things like that. We're actually doing next month a celebration of life for a young person who passed away, but was a musician and sort of like really deep in the music community in Rhode Island. His friends have started doing this annual celebration of life with a bunch of performances, music, raffles, donations, et cetera, et cetera. And they recently chose Rockstars as the beneficiary of that event going forward. So, it always comes back to community for us, communal funding models surrounding these kids with a positive community. And, we want everybody to feel like they're part of a community when they contribute to Rockstars, whether they're a donor, whether they're a kid, whether they're somebody's mom, whether they're a boys and girls club we work at. We consider all those like our chosen family. And so, kind of together and through these specific streams that I've described, that's how we make it work.
That's awesome. Well, it's very smart to have a lot of different channels that you're collecting, revenue from, because you never know when one will dry up or when it'll change.
Yeah.
So it's smart to have, as many as you can and continue to look for more. That's really cool. So you're doing, and I'm assuming that's primarily your focus, is looking for these funding sources and building your subscription base for the fan club, which also I think is very smart to have a subscription based donation opportunity for people. Um,
Yeah. We've,
okay,
we've learned a couple of things over, 22
yeah,
years. I'm not the sharpest guy, but I've figured out a couple of things.
yeah. No, that's. I mean, I think it's great. So you were on the Kelly Clarkson show. How did that come about?
Yeah, that it came about sort of organically. I had I've done a handful of podcasts like this and some, write-ups in the local paper and sort of small, press type things. And one day I just got a phone call from a producer who, left me a voicemail and said, "Hi, this is me, such and such. I'm a producer on the Kelly Clarkson show. We heard about rock stars and we wanted to talk to you." Of course, I thought it was kind of a joke at first. I listened to the voicemail while I was at work one day and I was like, okay. So I ducked into an office and I wound up calling the number back. And sure enough, it was this woman who was a producer on the show. This was when the show was filmed out in Burbank. And she started just asking me a bunch of questions. I almost felt like I was on an impromptu job interview.
Yeah,
And to be frank, like over the next couple of weeks, it felt like a very intense job interview. You know, they didn't come out and say, "Hey, like we want to have you on the show." It was this series of hurdles to kind of and tests to kind of pass. Um, hey, can you send us more information about this? Hey, can you give us the phone number of one of your students so we can reach out to him and ask some questions? Hey,
so it was like they kind of wanted to verify all of your claims were
they
true
did a
and all
lot
of
of due diligence.
yeah.
not only just on Rockstars, but on me personally.
Yeah.
I had to make actually like a little video. They wanted me to, make a selfie video with my cell phone, talking to Kelly, kind of explaining what Rockstars was, almost like a little performance. So it was a pretty intense couple of weeks because it went on. It was almost a daily occurrence for probably at least 2 weeks, maybe even slightly more. But eventually, at the end of that process, they said, okay, we want you to come out. How soon can you get here? And so it wound up being a little bit inconvenient for me, but of course it was like an opportunity I wasn't going to let slide by. So I think it was maybe a day or two later, I was on a plane out to Burbank, and I was spent a couple of days out there. My main remembrance from the show, or at least to like the lead up of the show, of course, I was excited, nervous, worried, scared, anxious, like all the feelings all at once.
Right.
And I had been around a lot of musicians. It wasn't like super unusual to meet somebody, relatively famous, although, Kelly is more than relatively famous. But the idea of being on, national TV was a little scary without, much prep work. I did spend time. The producers, asked me a lot of questions, and I think tried to prepare me as much as possible. But in hindsight, I think it actually made me more nervous because I'm
Yeah.
I'm much more of an off the cuff kind of conversational person as opposed to like
Yeah.
trying to memorize, like a tagline or a specific response to
Sure.
these three or four questions. So I think the more they tried to prepare me, it actually had the opposite effect. But once I was backstage in the green room, once it was, my segment was coming up, and I was on the show with the Dixie Chicks. We were on the panel together, like on the couch. So once I actually walked out, and there's some preamble before the cameras start rolling. So I got to meet Kelly. I met the Dixie Chicks. We talked for a minute or two, and before you settle in and they mic you up, and they sort of get the cameras rolling. So there was a couple minutes there of relative normalcy. And what I found was, talking to Kelly and the others for just that short amount of time, it just felt like the same as talking to a whole bunch of my other music friends, right? It was
Sure.
like they were different people, but they were the same people.
Yeah.
And so once I sat down and I sort of knew that that's how it was going to be, it just kind of flowed, and it wound up being, a very special and a very opportune, way to kind of share our story with like lots of people that never would have heard about us otherwise.
Yeah.
Getting the money was, of course, great. But I think more than that, really just the opportunity to expose rock stars to a wider audience. And then also, I think what I found was later, after it was all over, in the weeks and ensuing months, and even now it's been a couple of years now, a lot of people still remember that, or ask me about that, or watch that video. It's almost like this thing. I think it gave us a little bit of this glow. Like, this is probably a terrible analogy. We may have to edit this out, but almost like, you're a guy and you walk into the room with like this beautiful woman, and it almost like people look at you and be like, wow, like that guy must be like kind of cool or have something special going on to have like come in with such a beautiful woman, because he's not like a particularly good looking guy. It sort of gave us this glow of like, wow, like Kelly Clarkson, saw something in Rockstars, and, sort of, brought them out to the show. And I think that has kind of like helped or been more of a
Did
long
it bring
term.
did it bring some notoriety? Did you guys see a bump after you were on the show?
Yeah, we definitely did. I mean, I did some other related press like right before and right after the show aired. Nothing super huge, but I got a lot of phone calls from
Yeah.
different outlets and did some interviews. And then, of course, everybody who has been part of the Rockstars family for, all those years. I think it was really a moment of pride for all those people too.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of the lucky SOB that gets to be like the front man and meet all of the kids and tell these stories and, be on the show and everything. But we've always treated Rockstars like this communal family. And so I think all those people got a little taste and got to feel a real sense of pride by the fact that, we were recognized in that way by somebody, that wouldn't otherwise have noticed us. It wasn't somebody from
Sure.
the local area that we just stumbled into.
Yeah.
And that was really special for me to be able to feel that other
Yeah.
people got a little slice of what I get to experience more or less every day or a lot of days.
So now that you are where you are and you look back over the 20 some odd years of running Rockstars and looking into the future, I mean, what you've created, I think you've really changed the world. I think that's awesome. And
Thank
there's,
you.
like you said before, like that that is meaningful. Your work is meaningful. So, but looking back, what would you say was maybe the toughest moment in keeping things running? Was there ever a point where you just thought this is too difficult, this is too hard?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there was a time when I ever thought about sort of walking away from it because again, it's always been super important to me, and also at the same time, as much work as it is and as much effort, it feels more like a blessing and something that I'm grateful to do as opposed to something that I have to do. So in that way, my answer may be, I don't know, less traditional than the sort of like entrepreneur struggle story where their funding fell through or they're ready to throw in the towel. For me, a really big turning point in the journey that helped to really propel Rockstars actually was losing my corporate job. So I was doing corporate philanthropy at Hasbro, the big toy and game entertainment conglomerate.
Hmm.
For many years, I worked there. I wound up getting laid off, like a lot of folks are experiencing today, in corporate America. I was making a nice salary. It was very comfortable, lots of benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But what it made me realize was how important it was for me to have rock stars in my life. And it taught me this lesson of, this idea of perceived security. A lot of people spend their lives trying to do something in order to get to the thing that they want to do, so they sell themselves and say, oh, I'm just working this job until I can retire and really do what I want to actually do, or until I make a certain amount of money, then I'll be able to fund this thing that's like to write the great American novel, or whatever their
Yeah.
passion is. And for me, losing my job and being able to really pour myself more fully into rock stars as a result was really key to sort of understanding that, you know, we're all given like this gift of being alive, right? And of being born. And to be able to sort of use that not to eventually get to something, but to actually do it now, today, here in the moment, and sort of, commit to doing it regardless of the circumstances, regardless of, if we lose a grant, or regardless of if I get an email from a mom and we don't have enough money to enroll their kid and I have to tell them, sorry, we can't enroll you right now, or, right back in 6 months. It puts all those things into perspective. And so, I think that that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that I just feel blessed and grateful to have the opportunity to spend my time doing something that's so meaningful to me personally. And I think I might have said this already, but by doing something to help others, I am by definition helping myself. And so it never really feels like drudgery or a question of whether I'm going to keep going or not, because I know that I am.
Well, JJ, I really appreciate what you're doing for our industry. I appreciate what you're doing in the lives of young people, yeah, all over in your community and beyond. And hopefully, whoever's listening to this can, get some inspiration, whether they're going through a difficult time or trying to push through. I think there's a lot here that people can, pull from and be inspired to move forward. So I really appreciate you being on the show today, my friend. And we'll have to circle back and once you've got some more of these programs launched. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on, David. It's obviously a topic near and dear to my heart, as I know it is to yours. I just encourage anybody, follow your heart, and you can't go wrong.
Appreciate it. Take care.
You too, David.